And we're live. This is McDev, and we are back at it with another Free Code Camp course. All right, so this is an important, small, non-visual lesson, which is I think is interesting. Uh, so let's dive into it. We're going to break this down into three parts. Go over the overview so we understand the content, jump into the solution, and then if there's anything that comes up that's bonus content, we'll do that after the fact. All right, set the ID of an element. In addition to classes, each HTML element can also have an ID attribute. And what are the attributes? They are all these things as part of the inside the element opening tag. So I'm just doing this to make it a little bit easier to see visually. All right, so here inside our image tag, we have these three attributes. We have the class attribute, we have the source attribute, and we have the alternate text attribute. And so here it's saying that we can also add an ID to those attributes. There are several benefits to using ID attributes. You can use an ID to style a single element, and later you'll learn that you can use them to select and modify specific elements with JavaScript. And that's some cool stuff. I'll throw that into bonus content just so you can get a look ahead about some cool stuff you can do in the future with what you're learning. ID attributes should be unique. Browsers won't enforce this, but it's a widely agreed upon best practice. So please don't give more than one element the same ID attribute. Here's an example of how you can give your H2 element the ID of cat photo app. The H2 element inside the opening tag, we have the ID attribute, and we're putting it inside a string, some text called cat photo app. So now for the assignment directions, give your form element the ID cat photo form, the form element. All right, we found it here. This is the form element. Could also control search it. And so we're going to give it the ID cat photo form. All right, so right now, this form, this is the opening tag, this is the closing tag, and everything else in here is part of the content for this element. And so it already has one attribute called action. We could give it an attribute called class and add some classes to it, but we're going to follow the directions and give it an ID attribute. The ID attribute, as the directions state, is cat photo form. Cat photo form. And let's run the test. Ta-da! We are there. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward, and it's kind of a boring lesson by itself, but trust me, this is a great thing to have in the back of your mind because this is how you do interesting things when it comes to JavaScript or other things, other tools, even with CSS, etc. So time for the bonus content. All right, so I want to show you how to how to use JavaScript with this. So let me see here. I think I have an example. And a student I was working with called Edward. All right, so this is a totally different view if you've been following chronologically my videos. All none of my followers. So here we have our HTML. Okay, it's our HTML. We have an H1 attribute. We have a div that has an ID. Or we have an H1 element. We have a div element with an ID attribute. And we have a button with an ID. We have just like a little bit of CSS. I don't even think it's doing much, if at all. And then here we have our here we have our JavaScript. Now, let me try to simplify this example. So I'm going to create an H1. We've seen H1s before. So we have an opening and closing tag. Let me make this bigger. All right, and I'm not going to put anything inside here. Maybe I'll just do dot, dot, dot. Something's going to happen. And then here, I'll give the ID attribute, and we're going to call this FreeCodeCamp, just because. And then in the JavaScript, I'm going to say const. You don't need to worry about what any of this does. It's just a visual example. We're going to call this H1 thing. You can call that whatever. Equals document dot get element by ID. And the ID is FreeCodeCamp. All right, and then we're going to say access that new variable h1 thing dot enter HTML. I might have to capitalize that. Equals. Let's stick with aardvark. I chose random things because it wasn't important what they were called. All right, and so we're gonna eliminate all those things. It's still 3 dots because I think I have a typo in my stuff here, HTML. But okay. So what is happening here is we have we have our HTML element. The text inside that element is dot, dot, dot. But to make it better, we're going to call it llama. But our JavaScript is selecting that HTML element using its ID, get element by ID, and then we're doing something with it. We're saying, hey, you're going to change the, well, let's be more clear with this. We're going to say enter text equals aardvark. All right, and so if we can change this to anything, we can say turtle. And when the page reloads, it's turtle. So you can programmatically do things with your HTML using JavaScript, and a great way to select it is using an ID. There are other ways, but that's the most common way, and in many situations, the best way. So that bonus content was really jumping ahead in the coding journey, but not too far. You'll find out that you're going to be there pretty soon. So hopefully you found value in this.